It was past midnight. Snow blanketed the ground like a ghostly quilt, each flake catching the faint orange glow of distant streetlights. The wind howled through the trees, not softly, but in sharp, slicing bursts that made the branches groan and bow as if nature itself were shivering. Tom Carter tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his knuckles pale and rigid against the cracked leather. The heater had long since given up its fight against the cold, and the car's interior smelled faintly of oil and stale coffee. The road stretched endlessly ahead, silent, silver ribbons winding through black woods. Now and then his headlights cut across an empty field, catching the shimmer of frost on the wire fences. No other cars, no movement. Just the hum of his old engine and the rhythmic thump of the wipers sweeping away snowflakes that seemed determined to find their way back. He wasn't really driving anywhere, not home. Not away, just driving. Because stillness was louder than motion, and silence, when it came, was unbearable. His shift at the auto shop had ended hours ago, but Tom hadn't been able to face the emptiness waiting for him inside that small two-bedroom house on Briar Hill. A house that used to echo with laughter. A woman's laughter. Her name had been Anna. She had sunlight in her smile and patience in her touch. But now that house felt hollow, every corner echoing with ghosts of before the accident, before the silence, before he learned that even love could vanish in an instant, leaving only the smell of her shampoo on her pillow and a 7-year-old girl asking questions he didn't know how to answer. Her name was Lily. She was all he had left. Bright, curious, and heartbreakingly like her mother. She'd been sleeping when he left that evening. He'd told himself he just needed a drive to clear his head, but the truth was simpler and sadder. He couldn't stand being alone with the sound of her gentle breathing and the ache of missing someone who would never come back. He sighed, watching his breath fog the inside of the windshield. Then, as he rounded a dimly lit bend near Maple Ridge, something flickered at the edge of his headlights. At first he thought it was a deer, then maybe a trick of the snow. But when his tires crunched over a patch of ice and the beam steadied, his heart froze. There, just beyond the guardrail, stood a woman, barefoot, in the snow. Her white dress clung to her knees, its hem dark with dirt and melting ice. Her shoulders were trembling, her skin pale against the storm's fury. In one hand she held her heels dangling limply, like a memory she couldn't quite let go. Her hair, long, tangled, and wet, whipped across her face as she turned toward him. And in that fleeting second when their eyes met, Tom saw something that made his stomach twist, not madness, not fear, but a quiet, devastating shame. She looked away immediately as if she didn't deserve to be seen. Tom's foot slammed the brake instinctively. The car fishtailed for a heartbeat before stopping. For a moment he just sat there, frozen, the world outside reduced to white noise. Every part of him screamed that it wasn't safe, that this wasn't normal, that he should drive on. But another voice, and the one his wife used to speak with, got and whispered softly inside him. Do the right thing, Tom. Always. He swallowed hard, then pushed open the car door. The wind tore into him instantly, stinging his cheeks and numbing his hands. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he called out over the storm. Hey, are you all right? The woman didn't respond. She just stood there, arms wrapped around herself, shivering so violently it looked painful. Tom moved slowly, careful not to startle her. When he reached her side, he slipped off his jacket and wrapped it gently around her shoulders. She flinched, a sharp, instinctive recoil, but didn't pull away. Her lips were blue, her eyes distant, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. I didn't mean to, Tom frowned. Didn't mean to what? But she didn't answer. Her gaze had fallen to the ground, where her bare toes pressed into the snow like fragile petals wilting in the cold. He guided her toward the car, his breath coming out in uneven clouds. She resisted at first, muttering something about not wanting to cause trouble, but when her knees gave out, he caught her and carried her the last few steps. Inside, the heater groaned to life, pushing warm air through cracked vents. The woman, Elise, as he would later learn, sat silently, clutching his coat to her chest as if it were the only solid thing in the world. She refused the heater at first, afraid the fog on the windows would hide something from her view, afraid perhaps of being trapped again. Her fingers trembled as she brushed melting snow from her dress, but she didn't speak. Tom didn't press her. He knew what silence could mean. Sometimes it wasn't emptiness, it was survival. Minutes passed. Maybe 10, maybe 20. The storm outside seemed to soften, as if the world were pausing to listen. Tom turned down the radio, the static fading into the hum of the heater. "You've been walking a long time," he said gently. She nodded once, eyes unfocused. "Where were you headed?" Her throat tightened before she answered. "Nowhere. I just needed to leave." Her voice cracked on the last word, and Tom saw something flicker across her face, a mix of pain and relief. He didn't ask more. He just nodded, because sometimes kindness was quieter than words. He drove her to a nearby diner that stayed open all night. One of those small-town places where the waitress knows everyone's name. Inside, the light was soft and golden. Coffee steamed in chipped mugs. The air smelled of cinnamon and warmth. Elise sat in the booth, hands cupped around her drink like it was a lifeline. She stared out the window as the snow kept falling, and for the first time Tom noticed a faint bruise near her wrist, hidden under the sleeve of his jacket. He didn't need to ask where it came from. He could tell. Some stories write themselves on the body before they ever find their way into words. Eventually she spoke. Not all at once, not even in order, but in fragments, pieces of a life she'd been running from. A marriage that turned to fear. A promise broken. A night when leaving was the only way to survive. Tom listened, not as a rescuer, but as someone who understood what it meant to lose everything and still keep going. By the time dawn began to break, the snow outside had slowed to a whisper. The sky glowed pale pink, and Elise looked different somehow. Not whole, but alive. She smiled for the first time, a faint, uncertain curve of the lips, and whispered, "Thank you for stopping." Tom nodded. But in his heart he knew it wasn't him who had stopped. It was something greater. Something that guided him to that bend in the road at exactly the right moment. Later he would take Elise to a shelter, help her start again, and weeks down the line, his daughter Lily would meet her and call her Miss Elise with the innocence only a child could carry. And maybe, in some quiet way, the universe had given them both a second chance. A reminder that even in the coldest night, a single act of kindness can change two lives forever. Tom, still soaked from the snow, didn't push her. His instincts, the quiet kind that came from being a father, told him that sometimes people needed time before they could find the courage to speak. And when they finally did, it wasn't always about words. It was about the trembling hands, the distant eyes, the silent apologies for things that were never their fault. He sat behind the wheel, glancing at her reflection in the frost-covered window. The storm outside had slowed to a steady whisper, but the tension inside that small car hung thick like breath on glass. She looked fragile, not in the way porcelain is fragile, but in the way something shatters quietly long before it breaks. Her face was pale, her lashes heavy with melted snow, and when she finally spoke, her voice sounded like someone who had forgotten what safety felt like. "My name's Elise," she whispered. Or, it was supposed to be Mrs. Grayson by now. Tom turned slightly, his brow furrowing. He'd seen her face before, not in person, but somewhere. A magazine cover. Maybe a billboard. One of those people who belonged to another world. A world made of cameras, champagne, and the illusion that money solved everything. Elise Grayson. He repeated the name under his breath as if trying to remember where he'd heard it. And then it hit him, the morning news. Flashing on the TV in the auto shop's waiting area. The wedding of the year. Billionaire heir marries socialite Elise Monroe. Except she was here. Barefoot. Running. Her hands trembled as she spoke. "I was supposed to marry him today. Martin Grayson." Tom said nothing. He just nodded slowly, his fingers tightening around the steering wheel. "The whole world was watching," she continued, her voice cracking under the weight of her confession. The cathedral was packed. Celebrities, politicians, even a royal family member from somewhere in Europe. They called it the union of legacy and power, and I was supposed to smile, to stand beside him like I wasn't dying inside. Her words faltered, and she pressed a hand to her chest as though trying to keep something broken from spilling out. "I didn't love him," she said finally. "I didn't even know him anymore." Tom didn't ask why she went through with it. He'd seen that kind of fear before, the quiet kind that people hide behind perfect lives. But Elise wasn't done. She stared out the window, watching snowflakes land on the glass and melt instantly. "My parents adopted me when I was 8, she said softly. Old money. Old rules. Everything was about image, bloodlines, and control. I was their project. They raised me to be perfect, polished, the daughter they could show off, the one who would marry well and keep the family name sharing." She let out a small, bitter laugh. And Martin. He was their dream match. A hotel mogul, charming on camera, but behind those interviews and smiles, he was cruel. Her eyes glistened, but she refused to cry. He controlled everything, what I wore, who I saw, even when I could speak in public. He'd grab my arm too tightly when the cameras were gone. He'd whisper things that made my stomach turn. And when I tried to tell people, they smiled and said, "You're just nervous, darling." Every bride gets cold feet. Tom's jaw tightened. He'd seen bruises before, on customers who'd fallen, on neighbors who walked into a door. He recognized the pattern of silence. "So you ran," he said quietly. Elise nodded. "I didn't plan it. I just couldn't do it. When they started playing the music and I saw him waiting for me at the altar, I felt like I was walking into a cage. So I turned around, slipped off my heels, and ran out through the kitchen doors. The chef shouted after me. Someone tried to stop me, honey, but I just kept running." She took a shaky breath. The city streets were freezing, snow falling so fast I couldn't see. I tore the dress climbing over a fence, cut my feet on broken ice, and still, it felt better than staying. Tom said nothing. He just listened, the way someone listens to a confession that's been buried too long. By the time she finished, the heater had filled the car with warmth. Steam rose from her wet hair, and for the first time her shoulders eased slightly, as if the truth itself had thawed something inside her. He turned to her and spoke softly. "You're safe now, Elise. You don't have to explain anymore." Her eyes met his, and for a brief, fragile moment she believed him. The next few days were fragile, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Tom offered her his guest room, a small, cluttered space filled with old tools, boxes, and the scent of motor oil. It wasn't much, but to her, it felt like sanctuary. His daughter, Lily, was instantly fascinated by the mysterious woman who appeared in their home overnight, the lady with golden hair and sad eyes. "Is she a princess?" Lily whispered one morning, clutching her stuffed rabbit as Tom poured cereal. Tom smiled faintly. "Something like that." When Elise came down, wearing one of Tom's oversized sweaters and a pair of Lily's fuzzy socks, Lily gasped softly. "You look like the people on TV," she said innocently. Elise chuckled, a sound so gentle it seemed to surprise even her. "Do I? I think I've had enough TV for one lifetime." They laughed together, a small, awkward laugh that slowly grew warmer each day. Lily began showing her drawings, and Elise began teaching her little things, how to braid her hair, how to fold napkins into swans, how to dream without apology. And Tom watched quietly, a strange feeling blooming in his chest. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was something softer, deeper. The feeling of seeing two broken souls start to heal each other. Elise began helping around the house, cooking small meals, tidying the living room, leaving notes on the counter that said things like, "Thanks for breakfast," and "You have a kind heart, Tom." But at night, when the house was still and the wind rattled against the windows, she would wake up crying, her voice muffled against the pillow. Tom never mentioned it. He simply left a cup of tea outside her door each morning, steaming, waiting and wordlessly saying, "You're not alone anymore." Days turned into weeks, and though she rarely spoke of her past, her laughter returned, and soft at first, then brighter, like spring finding its way back after a long winter. And for the first time in a long time, Tom realized something extraordinary. You don't have to save someone to change their life. Sometimes you just have to stop in the middle of a snowstorm and offer them a place to rest, because kindness, in its purest form, isn't about rescue, it's about presence. Elise, broken as she was, still carried a kind of warmth that children could sense. It wasn't the kind you could fake. It wasn't the result of practiced smiles or rehearsed charm. It was something quieter, something buried deep beneath the bruises and the fear, a tenderness that survived in her no matter what had been done to her. Lily noticed it first. Children always do. Every night after homework and dinner, Elise would sit beside Lily's bed, a worn storybook open in her lap. Her voice, soft and melodic, filled the small room with the kind of comfort Tom hadn't heard in years. She read fairy tales, but in her voice, they felt real again, like little wishes whispered to the stars. Sometimes she'd stop mid-sentence, her mind drifting elsewhere, and Lily would gently tug her sleeve. "Miss Elise? What happens next?" Elise would blink, smile faintly, and continue as if she'd never left. She helped Lily with her homework, braided her hair the castle way, as she called it, 3 strands woven into tiny loops, decorated with ribbons they cut from an old curtain. Tom would watch from the hallway doorway, arms folded, heart full, and heavy all at once. He'd grown used to the quiet, the kind of silence that becomes part of the furniture. But now, the house had voices again. Laughter, the sound of crayons rolling across the table, the smell of pancakes that Elise insisted on making just because. For the first time in years, he came home from the shop to light instead of loneliness. But shadows, he knew, always waited for moments like these. They crept in quietly, through news channels, whispers, and headlines. It started one morning when Tom walked into the diner for coffee. The TV behind the counter was tuned to the morning news. He didn't notice at first until he heard the words, "Breaking billionaire's bride vanishes mid-ceremony. Reward offered." He looked up. And there she was, Elise, smiling in a white gown, standing beside Martin Grayson, the man whose face now filled the screen. All charm and charisma, reporters speculated. Some said she'd been kidnapped. Others whispered scandal, an affair, a runaway, a mental breakdown. But Tom knew the truth. She wasn't missing. She was surviving. By the time he got home, Elise was already sitting at the kitchen table, a newspaper spread out before her. Her hands were shaking. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "They'll find me, Tom. I know they will." Tom's chest tightened. He wanted to tell her it would be fine, that she was safe here, but even he couldn't promise that. She looked up at him, desperate. "Please don't turn me in. If they find me, they'll make me go back. You don't understand what he's capable of." Her voice broke, and in that moment Tom saw a fear he'd never seen before. Not in soldiers, not in victims of car wrecks he'd towed, not even in the mirror when his own world had fallen apart. This was a different kind of fear, the kind that lived under the skin. The kind that remembered every threat, every slap, every whispered warning made behind perfect smiles. He wanted to protect her. But even he knew they couldn't hide forever. That night he barely slept. He sat at the edge of his bed listening to the old house breathe. His mind caught between 2 worlds, in the duty of a father and the conscience of a man who knew what it meant to lose everything. He thought of Lily. What if this brought danger to their door? What if Martin's people came looking? What if one act of kindness cost him the only family he had left? But the answer came quietly, from the smallest voice in the house. Lily had woken in the night, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her eyes half open. "Daddy?" she whispered. Tom looked up. "Yes, sweetheart? You told me that good people help sad people." She rubbed her eyes. "Miss Elise is very sad. Please don't let the bad man take her." Those words pierced him deeper than anything else could have. Simple, honest, true. He kissed her forehead. "Go back to sleep, pumpkin," he whispered. But inside, his decision was already made. The next morning, Tom made a call to someone he hadn't spoken to in years, a friend from high school, now a lawyer specializing in domestic abuse cases. Her name was Dana Lee, sharp-minded, relentless, and one of the few people Tom trusted. He explained everything, slowly, carefully, leaving nothing out. When he finished, there was a long pause on the line. "Tom," Dana said finally, "if what you're telling me is true, this woman's not just running from a bad marriage. She's running from a predator." Over the next few days, Dana began digging. She had connections. People inside Grayson's company, assistants, former employees, housekeepers who'd signed NDAs but were willing to talk off record. What she uncovered made Tom's stomach turn. Photos, documents, police reports that had mysteriously vanished. A pattern of control, coercion, and silence spanning years. Martin Grayson wasn't a husband. He was a man who built empires on fear and manipulation, not just of Elise, but of anyone who got too close. "He's untouchable," Dana said one night over the phone, her voice low. "But we can build a case. We'll need Elise's statement, and we'll need to keep her safe until then." Tom hung up and turned to Elise, who was sitting by the window watching the snow fall again. Her face was pale in the dim light, but her eyes, for the first time, had a flicker of something new. Not just fear, hope. But Martin didn't take silence lightly. Within days, his men began to appear. Slick cars idling across from Tom's house, unfamiliar faces at the diner. One even came to the garage, asking strange questions about a blonde woman in a white coat. Tom pretended not to know what they meant, but his hands shook for hours afterward. Then came the phone calls. No voice, just breathing. And once, a whisper that froze him to his core. "You can't hide her forever." Tom started sleeping on the couch, a baseball bat within reach. He taught Lily to keep the doors locked. Elise, meanwhile, tried to stay invisible. Her hair darker now, her clothes borrowed, her world reduced to shadows and whispers. But through it all, she and Lily still read bedtime stories. They still laughed quietly in the kitchen, and sometimes when Tom caught Elise's eyes across the room, he realized something he hadn't in years. Sometimes, the bravest people are the ones who have every reason to run and then choose, instead, to stay. But Elise, with Tom and Lily at her side, stood her ground. The world had tried to silence her before. Now it listened. What began as a whisper of scandal slowly transformed into a storm of truth. She faced cameras again, not as the runaway bride they once mocked, but as a woman unafraid to speak. The first time she gave her statement, her hands trembled. Flashes from the cameras made her flinch, but Tom was there, standing quietly at the edge of the crowd, his eyes steady, his presence unshakable. He didn't need to say anything. He just nodded. Once. And she drew strength from that single gesture. "People think wealth protects you," Elise said to the reporters, her voice steady despite the quiver in her chest. "But money doesn't buy kindness. It can hide cruelty. It can silence the truth, but it cannot bury it forever." Her words rippled through headlines, through morning shows and news blogs, through living rooms and phones and hearts. The world, and for the first time, began to believe her. Months passed. The snow melted into rivers and spring sunlight warmed the quiet town. Elise was no longer the woman in the torn white dress, wandering barefoot through the storm. She was something more. She became a voice, a symbol, a beacon for women who had been told to smile when they wanted to scream, to stay silent when they needed to survive. She worked with Dana, the lawyer who had first believed her, and together they founded a small organization, the Safe Light Foundation, dedicated to helping victims of abuse rebuild their lives. She spoke at shelters. She visited hospitals. She met women who looked at her the way she once looked at herself, with fear, exhaustion, and the faintest spark of hope. "I used to think running made me weak," she told them. "But sometimes running is how you find your strength." And Tom found healing too, for years. He had carried guilt, the kind that crept into the quiet moments, the kind that whispered, "You couldn't save her," whenever he thought about his late wife, Anna. But in helping Elise, he had learned something powerful, that you can't always fix the past, but you can help someone build a future. He began spending more time outside again, fixing neighbors' cars, teaching Lily how to change a tire, laughing again. Really laughing. The house that once felt cold was now filled with warmth, not just from the fire that crackled in the hearth, but from the sound of life itself. Lily's giggles, Elise's soft singing while she cooked, the simple joy of shared mornings over coffee. Sometimes, when the sun dipped below the horizon, Tom would look out at the driveway on the same place he'd first found her in the snow, and wonder how different everything might have been if he had just kept driving that night. But he didn't. And because of that one act of kindness, 3 lives were changed forever. Elise continued to grow stronger. She wrote a memoir, The Woman in the Snow, that detailed not just her escape, but her rebirth. It became a symbol of courage. And though fame followed her again this time, It didn't consume her. She never forgot where it began, in a quiet town in a broken-down car, with a man who offered his jacket and asked for nothing in return. Lily laughed more now. She danced around the living room, her hair braided the castle way, her drawings taped proudly to the refrigerator. Sometimes she'd say, "Miss Elise is my best friend," and Elise would smile, her heart catching at how much love one small girl could give so freely. Tom would just watch, a faint smile playing at his lips, grateful one for second chances, for unexpected miracles, for the simple grace of doing the right thing when no one is watching. The house was full again, not of noise but of life, of healing, of hope. And if this story touched your heart, if you believe in compassion, in second chances and in the power of a stranger's kindness, then please, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Kind Heart Stories. Your support helps us bring real, unforgettable stories to life. Stories that remind us what it truly means to be human. Speech balloon special message before you go. We'd love to hear from you. Have you ever helped a stranger when they needed it most? Or has a stranger ever changed your life in a way you didn't expect? Tell us in the comments. Because sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest ripples, and your story might just inspire the next one.